Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'm gonna give you a full walkthrough of how to generate realistic AI photos on Unreal Photos. So how it works, just in terms of getting started, is you go to the create page where of course we have many different presets you can choose from. They are already sort of set and done. You can just click the create button on there. But in this video, I'm gonna go into the details of how it actually works in terms of prompting and using reference photos and how to create your own. So if you click the custom option, then you'll see a prompt box where you can just write a word, for example, as a model, and then you click the create button, and then it just starts loading your photos. So that's sort of the simple way in the UI. Now, in terms of like how do you actually structure the prompts, what are you supposed to write in there? So if you just write the word model, that's how you refer to yourself. So basically, you don't write me, or you don't write your actual name or stuff like that. You have to write the word model. And if you only write the word model, then it's basically going to generate AI photos which is sort of loosely based on your training data, or where it's loosely taking inspiration from your training data. So the generated photos are going to be super random, like you see here. These are just like the 12 first photos I made if I just type in models. So they're going to be all over the place essentially. And so these are some of my training photos, and what you'll see is that the generated photos by default sort of take inspiration from those training photos. Now, the way you then structure prompts, or what I would recommend, is sort of short sentences separated by commas. So for example, I could write model sunset at the beach, and then it's going to be my model in this environment where we're already getting more consistency now because of the prompt. And then if we want to add stuff onto it, I could just add another comma and be like wearing a white shirt, and another one like holding a volleyball. So this is sort of the way I recommend you just build up prompts step by step. And the good thing about this is that if you could also write this sort of as a full sentence or full paragraph where you write and sort of describe everything out. But the problem is if the prompts get too long, then each word in the prompt will have less influence. So by keeping the prompt short and maybe commas separated like this, it's more easy to change, let's say, the color of the shirt, or make adjustments because the prompt is sort of just easier to understand. I'll show you some examples later also. Now, in terms of sort of the clothing and the adherence to your training photos, what you want to be aware of is, for example, you see on the left side here, where I'm standing there with the plane. This is one of my training photos I used to generate my AI model. It has, you see the shirt with the exact same way it's folded as one of the AI generated photos you just saw before. So basically what happens is the shorter your prompt is, the more the generated photos are going to lean against or take inspiration from your training photos. So what you can do then to get around that, let's say that your training photos, like you're wearing a shirt that you don't like, which ends up showing up a lot when you generate photos, is you have to add more details to the generated output. So this scene here doesn't make too much sense. It's not necessarily a good photo, but just to show you an example, if we add in wearing a thick, expensive black leather jacket, now essentially we're getting further away from the training data and more towards like your specific prompt. Now, what you'll still notice is actually or you probably don't notice, but now you can at least, the color of this, one of the leather jackets that I added before is actually the same as in one of my training photos. So it's still taking some inspiration from it. So the way you can get around that is if you add even more specific details to the prompt. So for example, now we're asking for wearing black leather motorcycle jacket. This way you see now the output generated, or the generated images, are even more consistent to a specific style. So basically, if you want to avoid your generated photos looking similar to your training photos, the way you do that is just you be more and more specific in the prompt. So it's usually easy to start with short and simple prompts, but if something is wrong, then this is the way you should just add more details. Just tell the AI how the photo should be. And of course, let's say you don't really know what the different styles of leather jackets are called, like I don't, for example, you can just ask ChatGPT or something like that to get the exact names of it. In terms of changing the perspective of the photo, if we just jump back to the previous example here, now you see these photos are all like from chest up to the face. So let's say you want to zoom out a bit more with the camera. The way you would do that is, for example, you can write something like wide angle photo, which you see now it becomes a bit more wide angle, but also looks like a selfie on several of the photos. So what you can do instead is you can prompt for stuff that's otherwise invisible. So for example, if I add to the prompt here, I add and black pants. Now the AI is basically forced to generate like more of the photo or more of the scene, because of course we have to show the black pants, otherwise it doesn't matter to have them in the prompt. So this way, for example, also if I added brown shoes, then it would be forced to zoom out further. So this is an easy way to control the perspective and basically how much is visible in the generated photos. Another option is you could also, for example, start the prompt with something like a low perspective photo, or you could do like a bird's eye view or stuff like that. You can't sort of full control things, and it probably can't do extreme angles like a drone photo of a model or stuff like that, but it's at least possible to control the perspective in various ways, either by prompting for stuff that's outside the scene or by writing something like a low perspective photo, for example. In terms of poses, again, just take another example here, model standing on a balcony. If I add something like confident, relaxed posture to it, and again, depending on your training photos, like if your training photos has good posture, then naturally, even with short prompts, you're probably gonna get good generated AI photos. But let's say your training photos is a bit more of like a hunched over posture or whatever, then adding stuff like this can help your output. So I find that confident, relaxed posture usually helps, at least for my model. You could also be more specific and ask for stuff like smiling, casually leaning against the railing, stuff like that. And you see actually the generated photos do follow this pretty closely. So it's not an exact science with the posture. You can basically just ask for however you want the model to look, or like yourself to look. If the AI model generally looks wrong, again, just going back to this example, it could be, let's say you're bald, but then the AI sometimes has a tendency to give you hair. The way you can get around that is you just add stuff again to the prompt. So it can be something like, let's say that these photos here of me, like let's say I didn't have that much hair, or like the AI generated photos are like too muscly or stuff like that. I could add something like skinny, thin, short hair to it. And what you see is maybe my hair is a bit shorter, a bit thinner here. Maybe I look a bit more skinny, not a big difference here. If that doesn't work, you can be even more like clear in your language and write like extremely thin and skinny, very short buzz cut. And what you'll see is now some of the photos are starting to get like a completely different hairstyle on me. The reason it doesn't work on all the photos is because all my training data, like the original photos of me, are sort of very consistent. So that's why, like, even though we write sort of very clear language, it still only affects some of the final generated photos. But let's say you have all your original photos, all your training photos where you're bald, but the AI sometimes adds hair to you. If you write stuff like this, let's say no hair or bald at the end, then it will usually work all the time to like avoid putting hair on your head. In terms of negative prompts, following the logic here before a little bit, we can't really ask for stuff we don't want, or we can't say no to anything. So for example, here, let's say I want to generate a photo of me at the beach, but I get sunglasses in some of the photos. Let's say I don't want that. What you can do is you can't really say no sunglasses. What you have to do instead is you have to specify what should be there instead. So for example, I can write beautiful clear blue eyes or something like that. And now also you'll see the photo change a lot because it's sort of focusing on now the new thing, which is the eyes. That's now important. So sometimes it might cost things you don't want, but basically you have to ask for what should be there instead. Maybe a better example would be, let's say you want to create a photo of you riding a motorcycle. You could be like model driving a motorcycle. Now, if you don't want the helmet on to show your face, right, then you can't really add no helmet to this prompt. What you have to do instead, you can write something like his slick hair blowing in the wind. And now what you'll see is, of course, to show your hair, we can't really have a helmet on, and now all the photos are actually without helmet. So this is the way, like if you want to avoid stuff, you have to ask for what should be there instead. In terms of maybe you want to think like, oh, it's difficult to write these prompts. Can I use AI for it? You could ask the ChatGPT to generate these prompts for you. I would generally not recommend it because what happens is that usually the prompts tend to get very long, and then they become sort of too epic looking, and you can get really consistent output with this, but they become too pro and a little bit too AI looking. Of course, you can ask ChatGPT to write shorter prompts in the correct style and stuff like that, but I think if the prompts are really short in the first place, you're probably not getting that much from it. Of course, you can get ideas, but yeah, anyway, just these long prompts I would recommend avoiding, and I think writing your own is pretty easy, so I would generally recommend that. In terms of text in the photos, if you put text in citation marks, like here, then it will actually write text quite realistically. Sometimes it will fuck it up a little bit, but as you see here, it works pretty well. In terms of group photos, these are really hard because the AI is like when you generate your AI model with your training photos, the model learns to know your face so well that basically everyone starts looking like you, even girls. So generally, I would avoid making these group photos. For some people, it might work better than others. Maybe if the people have like sunglasses on, it might not be as clear, but I would generally recommend it. Also, It's not, let's say you want to use these photos for the dating apps, then generally it's not recommended anyway to generate these social pics or pics with girls, because it can look like you have a girlfriend, or it might just look off, or it just generally I would recommend avoiding these. If you want to, you can use the face swap feature on the edit page instead on Unreal Photos, where there's a specific guide in there you can see as well, but you can basically just add your face onto another person's photo, and that way everything will look natural and you will just have your face in one person. Now, another thing to be aware of is holding stuff. So for example, let's say I'm sitting in a bar holding a glass of whiskey. What you'll see is the glass becomes too big or too small sometimes, or maybe my hands are holding in a bit weird way or stuff like that. This is just a risk. So basically, the more complex the final photo should be, the more stuff you want to interact with, the harder it's going to get. So there is an edit feature you can use where you can try and regenerate the glass in case you like it, or there's like a create similar function where if one photo looks pretty good, you can create something similar to it. And otherwise, the easiest way is just to generate like a lot of variations. You just have to know that if you're trying to generate sort of complex scenes, it just takes like more effort. Essentially, it's just more random. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. In terms of also a similar problem, but getting proportions right. Let's say you want to write a prompt like this: model enjoying himself sitting on the tailgate of a pickup truck. Sometimes what happens is that either, for example, you become way bigger than the truck, or the truck becomes way bigger than you in an unrealistic way. This is just really hard to avoid. So also again, for complex scenes like this, you just have to do more generations before you get a good photo. And yeah, you can also use reference photos, which I'll show in a bit, which can help get the proportions right though. Now that we are talking about the cars here, license plates also usually gets fucked up. So you can specify details like a California license plate, and you can write out the exact text you want, which will make the text look way more realistic. But then you see also the license plate now sort of takes center stage in the photo because it's like a big part of the prompt. So generally, I would recommend, if you're doing photos with cars, to either be standing on the front and then just hope it generates one where there's no license plate in the front of the car, or maybe you want to stand, I don't know, just somewhere where the license plate is not visible. Now for reference photo, this is the other big part of generating photos, and so like one of the most powerful features in here. So basically what it does is, if we jump back to the previous example here, then you'll see the photos generally look like a pro photographer took it. So you have a blurry background and maybe the lighting is really good and stuff like that. And people will sort of assume that some of these stuff are AI photos by now. So the way you can get around that is if you take a reference photo taken with a smartphone. It could even just be like a random photo like this that I took one time. With the exact same prompt, just adding this reference photo in, you'll see that the output, the generated photo, now takes a completely different vibe, where we get like a visible background and we get sort of the blue vibe here, for example, from the blue reference photo. But it just really changes things up. And you see we go from one which is looking very polished to now a much more realistic, casual smartphone photo. So this is a really powerful feature you want to be using. So the way you use this is just, if you go to the custom preset, you just upload the photo in there. And then you have to, this sort of similarity slider here is really important to play around with when you're using reference photos. So just to go through it, if we put the similarity slider to 0, it basically means that the generated photos will look very different from the reference photo you upload. So if we stick to the prompt the same way as we did before, and we set the similarity to 0 to the reference photo, you see that the reference photo almost has no influence over the generated photos. Now, if we set it to 1, this is where the setting I used before. Now you see we have some influence from it, the reference photo, and if we set it to 2 or even 4, you'll see that the photos start to look even more like just the random beach photo, and like the prompt or me start to have sort of less influence over it. You'll see I'm just like walking off in the distance. So if you're using these sort of vibe reference photos, you need to set the similarity slider to 1 or 2. Again, just the example here from before, what you can do is you can also generate like other scenes where it's not like from the same scenario essentially. So for example, with this balcony photo, I'm actually using the exact same reference photo you saw here before, but now just having a prompt where I'm standing on a balcony. And you see this also, even though there's no sand and no beach here specifically, we still get this sort of realistic look where the background is visible and it's like a clear blue sky and stuff like that. So you can use these sort of vibe photos to generate like wildly different outcomes just based on your prompt. So it's really powerful actually. Another example here, just like a random photo of a street at night. If I use that and then write in the prompt, for example, model at night in the city wearing a suit, It also has some effect, not that much at this time. So what I try to do here instead is just try to drag the similarity slider to 2 instead, and now you see the reference photo has way more influence over the final generated image. Now I'm starting to move a little bit into the background, but yeah, so you just have to try it out. Basically, like 1 to 2 similarity with these sort of random reference photos works really well. What's even easier is if you use a reference photo of a person. So for example, if I have a photo like this here, what you can do is you set now the similarity way more towards the reference photo. And in the prompt, you just make it way more simple. You can just write model. So what you see here is that these photos actually look a lot like the original one. But the problem is that it might get, even though the vibe might be similar, you see here it looks like I'm sitting at a cafe instead of in a rickshaw. So what I have to do now is drag the slider even more towards the reference photo. So now basically it's a very sort of close comparison with my final generated AI image on the right side and the reference photo on the left side. So this is a super powerful feature to generate photos based on other photos. Now, if the person in the reference photo doesn't look like you, so just another example here, what might happen is that if we use the same settings where the prompt is just model and we have the slider all the way to 8, what you might be able to see is that some of these photos turn out fine, but others, for example, I get a big beard here. This is not a big problem if it only happens, some of the times, but if in your situation you find that the reference photo of someone else that doesn't look like you, it really messes with how you look. What you can do instead is you can drag the slider back to, let's say, 4, and then you have to describe now in the prompt the image a little bit more. So basically, it's making up for the slider is dragging more towards not using the reference photo as much, but then the prompt instead sort of describes the scene. And now, for example, I don't get a beard in any of these photos. So the easiest way is just only writing model and have a very similar score or very high similarity like 8. But if it doesn't work for you, you can try a longer prompt and a lower number, yeah. Now, how to find these reference photos? I recommend going on Instagram because what you want to use is that you want to use reference photos which are taken from a smartphone and has a clear, visible background to get this sort of casual, realistic look. If you take a photo from a professional camera with a blurry background, then your generated photos will also have this professional look. And that's already what happens when you use just prompt without a reference photo. So the main reason to use reference photos is to get this visible background. So one way I would recommend doing it is just go on Instagram, and then if you find girls that for example, and you just check who they're following, and then you open the guys' profiles of who she's following, then you can get some great ideas in there. You can also, of course, just search hashtags or whatever you want to do. This is a great way to find some examples. And then in terms of actually downloading the photos, I recommend this extension here for Chrome called Turbo Downloader for Instagram. If you use that, then when you hover your mouse over the Instagram photo, there's like a download button, or it's also in the top right corner if you open it up. If you're on mobile, you can also just screenshot the page, or you can zoom in on the photo and screenshot. Either way, it's fine. Just make sure to cut out the Instagram part of the photo before you upload it to the website. Otherwise, it's going to mess with the whole thing. In terms of copyright with these reference photos, you have to be a little bit aware of that. So, of course, the best is if you use either your own photos or if your friends, where they've given you permission or stuff like that. If you use photos from like normal guys, and you sort of like they're like your face is on it now instead of theirs, and the photos are also different, it's usually like it shouldn't be a problem. Technically, it is their intellectual property. So if you steal the style too closely, it's technically wouldn't be okay. But of course, this whole AI world is a bit of a gray zone right now. It's hard to know exactly when something is copyright. But if you're taking something from a pro photographer or a famous person or stuff like that, and your final photo looks very much like theirs, then you can definitely get into copyright issues. So I would recommend that you either get permission or you just take it from regular dudes, and then you make sure to, of course, not look too similar. But if you like use reference photos from pro photographers or from famous people, then definitely make sure that your final generated photos does not look too much like the original, so you don't need to get into any issues or trouble. So just to summarize everything, with the 3 easiest ways to get great photos, the first is just a short, simple prompt like this, where you get a bit of more of a pro look, but it works really well and really easy. The second one is, again, a short, simple prompt, but now adding in a reference photo for the vibe and for the visible background like this. And again, if something looks bad, you can just add more detail, like what kind of shirt you want, what kind of posture you want, stuff like that. And then the last option is using a reference photo with a person. We use like a high similarity and just a simple prompt, which could just be model. And then you also get great photos this way. So in terms of the success rate, I would say for simple scenes, usually every 5 to 10 photos, you're going to get a great photo that you like would want to use. For more complex scenes, let's say someone skating or holding a whiskey glass or stuff like that, you often do end up having to do like 30 plus photos before you get a good one, just because there's so many variables that can sort of jump around in the photos. So yeah, I would recommend that most of the photos you make are simple scenes, just because it's easier. And then let's say you really love skating or you really love drinking whiskey in the bar or stuff like that, then maybe you dedicate some more time to generate a few of those more complex scenes. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching.